Well, this is a very in-your-face topic.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you are all doing very well. Sorry, Debbie, did you want to say something?
I said this is a very in-your-face topic.
I'll take that as a compliment. Before we commence, I know so I have been rather suspicious during these ladies' shiurim online that not everybody here is a lady. But just to wish you a mazel tov, Ashley Tugendhaft, on Davina's engagement. Mazel tov to you and all the family. And what beautiful news. She met Ellie during lockdown. They've got engaged during lockdown. It's really wonderful news. Mazel tov to you, to your mother, to Colette, and all the family. And you are very, very welcome to join these shiurim as well. Today's topic is and there are going to be three parts to this. If anybody's wondering, this week, Shabbat is Rosh Hashanah, and therefore it's a break from our normal Kli Yakar schedule, and therefore we have this opportunity to focus a little bit on the themes of this time of year and to think about Rosh Hashanah. So, I did present the question. I'm going to present it from a halachic perspective, but the truth is that it's not just a halachic question. It is a question about all of us in general, as Debbie called it, an in-your-face topic. It's going to be a question where we will have to behavior at this time of year. Once we've done that, I'd like to look at a few different angles of answering this. We'll finish off with Rav Rimon's approach, and then with whatever time we have left, I'd like to explore Rav Rimon's philosophy of Teshuvah, because I think it is very, very rich and very, very valuable. And if any of you have attended shiurim in the past where I have referenced or spoken about Rav Rimon's philosophy of Teshuvah, I hope you'll forgive me that we're doing this again. And this is the time of year where we need to revise these things. So let's start at the very beginning. Today's shiur is dedicated by Fortuna Shachna in memory of her mother, Fanny Bat Yitzchak Amzalem, Zichrona Livracha, whose yortzeit is on the 28th of Elul. Fanny, thank you so much for dedicating the shiur. And if anybody ever does want to dedicate a shiur for any occasion, happy or otherwise, please do speak to Ray in our office. Our starting point is the Gemara in Yerushalmi, source number 1, which says as follows. Rabbi Chia Ruba Mafkid al-Rav, the great Rabbi Chia, instructed Rav, in at Yechil Mechil Kol Shatachulim B'Tara Achol. If you're able, throughout the year, for everything you eat, to eat it in a state of ritual purity, that's what you should do. Not just holy things or special things, everything that you eat. If you can sustain that throughout the year, go for it. Ve'im lav, however, he tells him, if that's not sustainable or practical, te'achil shiva yomin min shata, well, 7 days a year, just for 7 days, make sure that everything you eat, you do so in a state of purity. What 7 days was he talking about? The Torah tells us in source number 2, in the Yerushalmi Rabbi Chia Mafkid l'Rav Yiteach l'Mechel Kol Shata B'Tara, etc. The Chat of Avya, the Avya wrote, Kibalti, I've received the following tradition. Eilu shiva yamin shebein Rosh Hashanah leyom HaKippurim. These are the 7 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Those are the 7 special days a year. Ad kan, close speech marks. The Koreotan Shiva Yamim. Why does he call them the 7 special days? We talk about the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the 10 special days. Why does he call them the 7 days? On Rosh Hashanah, you don't have to tell somebody about the need to be in ritual purity. Because before Rosh Hashanah, people would have made sure that they were pure in order to go to the Beit HaMikdash. That would have been not a problem. People in honor of the Chag would have made sure they were pure. So we've only got 7 days left, which he had to worry about. So This isn't overly relevant to us, unfortunately. Hopefully it will be relevant this year, that we're all going to have to suddenly find the ashes of the Parah Adumah to look after us all. But now the Torah goes on to talk about something which is more relevant. And he says, Va'al kain, therefore, nohagin ba'ashkenaz, the Ashkenazi custom is, she'af mi she'eino nizhar mipat shel ovdei gilulim, even somebody who normally eats kosher bread which was made by non-Jews, ba'aseret yemei tshuva hu nizhar, in the 10 days of tshuva, you have to be careful not to. I'm sure we're all familiar with the concept of chalav akum, milk, which was made without any Jewish supervision or involvement. There's also a concept of pat akum, bread which was made by non-Jews. Now, all the bread which is kosher certified by Kosher Australia here in Melbourne is pat Yisrael. It's considered as if it was made by Jews. Even the bread in coals was made in an oven which was turned on by Rabbi Mordechai Gutnick and has never been off. And if it has been off, we know about it. And even all those mountain breads and all those things that you buy, if Kosher Australia say it's kosher, then it's been turned on by a Jew, or a Jew has had some involvement in the process. Nevertheless, there are places in the world where they rely on eating bread which is kosher bread made with kosher ingredients in a kosher way, but without any involvement of a Jew. If you are in such a place, the Ashkenazi custom is that 10 days a year, you don't eat that bread. And 10 days a year, you only eat bread which was made by Jews. The Or Zarua in source number 3 understands these words differently. He quotes the Yerushalmi that we mentioned before, if you can, do it properly 7 days a year. Mihu, however, the Or Zarua says, Ein li ra'aya misham shani achol omar de lo tivau Rabbi Chilarav ela shiva yamim b'shana. Eizu shiva sheyu. He says from the Yerushalmi, there is no indication as to which 7 days we are talking about. It just says, be particular for 7 days. And so it could be any 7 days a year. Whenever you want, you take your detox from Pat Akum, you only eat Pat Yisrael. It's not 7 specific days. Nevertheless, it is codified in the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch tells us in source number 4, Af mi she'eino nizhar mipat shel kutim, even somebody who is not careful or particular about not eating bread made by non-Jews, ba'aseret yemei tshuva tzarich lizaher, in the aseret yemei tshuva, you have to be extra careful. And so we have a fascinating halakha. The halakha seems to suggest that we're expected to be strict in this area of halakha only 10 days a year, which brings us to the topic of our shiur. Are we not being halachic hypocrites in the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah? 10 days you're not going to eat this bread because it's Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because you're being judged. And then you break your fast on Pat Akum at the end of Yom Kippur. What's going on here? What's the point in doing something if you know for sure that it's a temporary measure? Rav Rimon compares this to driving along in the road and your GPS tells you that there's a police car ahead. So you slow down as you go past the police car. You're safely below the speed limit. And when the policeman is safely behind you, you speed up again. Is that what we're doing at this time of year? That for 10 days we're careful, ooh, Hashem is watching, and then the rest of the year we don't care? Is that which takes place between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that much more important than that which takes place between Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah? How can we explain this seeming hypocrisy in our standards? And it's not only in the particular custom of eating Pat Akum or not eating Pat Akum at this time of year. There are other examples in Halacha as well. If we have a look at source number 5 in the Matei Ephraim, he tells us, Ha'ish asher naga yirat Hashem belibo, the person for whom the fear of Hashem has touched their heart, Yosif ometz biyamim eileh, in these days will make extra efforts, lilmodim atalmidim, to learn with their students, bishkida rabbah, with great intensity and commitment. Echad gdolim ve'echad ktanim, whether they are older students or younger students. The Mata Ephraim is telling us that at this time of year, we have to make an extra effort in our education. But it seems to be that we're raising our standard as a temporary measure. The Maharil in source number 6 brings us a story. Pa'am achat, once upon a time, ba'aseret yemei tshuva, in the aseret yemei tshuva, sha'alu b'beit ha'kneset achar aveda b'cherem. There was a lost article, and they announced about this last article in Shul, and they said, if anybody knows where this item is, and they don't let us know, that person should be put in cherem, which is a very harsh and strict way to announce something with serious consequences. Vayichar af Maharil ba'ishahu, and the Maharil was very angry with the person who made that announcement. Va'amar, and he asked, Eich shayach lachkor b'cherem b'yamim ha'elu, in these days, in the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, how is it appropriate to do such an investigation under the threat of cherem? In these days, when our lives are hanging in the balance. Furthermore, the Maharil says, V'gam im adam chayav b'beit din shvuah lechavero, if in a beit din you are obliged to swear about something regarding a matter of conflict with your friend, mamtin ad achar hayamim hanaroim lashpio, as wait until after the Yamim Noraim, and then make that person swear. So we have numerous examples, and we're going to look at just one more before I ask you to please give me all of the answers. We have numerous examples of how, during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, we're expected to live on a higher standard. We're expected to raise our game in the Aseret Yemei Tshuva. But it appears to be only a temporary expectation, as the Shulchan Aruch tells us in source number 7. V'chol hayamim shebein Rosh Hashanah leyom haKippurim, on all the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, marbim betfilot v'tachanonim. We daven extra and we add supplications. We go the extra mile, specifically at this time. And then when the Ramah goes through for Ashkenazim, the halachot of this time, he says, V'omrim Avinu Malkeinu erev b'boker, we add Avinu Malkeinu to our tefillot apart from Shabbat. V'afilu im chal milah, even on a Brit Milah, she'ein omrim tachanun, you don't say tachanun if there's a Brit Milah. Afilu hachi omrim Avinu Malkeinu, you still say Avinu Malkeinu. V'omrim b'chol yom shlosha pa'amim vidui kodem alot hashachar, we say vidui, all those ashamnus at the end of slichot in the early hours of the morning. Apart from an Erev Yom Kippur, you only do it once. And then it's codified in halacha, ve'ein notnim cherem. You don't issue a cherem at this time of year. V'chein ein mashbi'in adam b'beit din, you don't make somebody take an oath in a beit din ad achar Yom Kippur, until after Yom Kippur. So that is the question. We've spent the first quarter of today's shiur just posing the question. And the question is that there are numerous areas of halacha where we appear to be expected to live our lives on a higher halachic standard, but only for 10 days. How is that not hypocrisy? Why is that not like the driver who slows down when he knows the policeman is there and then continues driving afterwards, completely oblivious to the rules? And of course, this isn't just a halachic question. It's a question about all of our behaviors in general. And for those of us who year after year have made New Year's resolutions, which haven't exactly lasted, and once again we find ourselves on Rosh Hashanah making New Year's resolutions, even though we know it's not necessarily going to last. Or if there's anybody at this time of year who says to somebody else, no, not in Elul. This isn't a way to behave in Elul. Or don't tell me that. I don't want to hear that in Elul. It's almost Rosh Hashanah. Don't behave that way. Surely, the correct approach to Rosh Hashanah should be, I never want to hear that. You should never behave that way. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the question. Please, what are your answers?
Perhaps we could
Why
say
can't
that.
we?
perhaps we could say that mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. Very often when a person makes a commitment to do something, it doesn't necessarily always terminate. Sometimes it can have a continuity. A person might realize, hey, this is not a bad idea to continue on and to continue on with this derech. At the time that we make it, I don't think anyone actually says, well, I'm only going to do it these 10 days. I don't think there's a verbalization of that. I think sometimes, do last.
Okay, so Riva has suggested, although Minna stepped in with a little argument at the end. Riva says, mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. If you start off doing something for the wrong reason, you'll end up doing it for the right reason. If you just taste something, it'll give you the energy and the impetus to go on. And Riva says, nobody says it's only for these 10 days, although Minna stepped in and says, well, it is. Why, Minna?
Because a lot of people take on to just drink Chalav Yisrael over the Aseret Yemei Tshuva.
Oh, really? Chalav Yisrael?
No,
like
when they do Chalav Yisrael, yeah. A lot of people do that.
Taught me something. All right. Well, certainly Pat Yisrael codified in Halacha is only for 10 days. There's no need afterwards. And in theory, you could break your fast on Pat Akum, which is a funny way to finish your Yom Kippur. But certainly Riva's direction is a direction we will explore. Other answers, please.
Am I able to offer a comment though?
Certainly.
It's not analogous to an Olympic sprinter. He works harder and trains harder in the run-up to the final race. So why can't we do that? Why are we struggling? I don't understand why there's a struggle with why we shouldn't try harder during this period.
So Minna says, using the mashal of an Olympic sprinter, obviously as the final race is approaching, they're going to put in that extra effort and be extra careful and eat all the right things and do all the right things and make the extra effort and go the extra mile. And therefore, for an Olympic sprinter to behave differently during the Olympics than they do a few months later isn't hypocrisy. During the Olympics, you need to behave like you should during the Olympics. When it's not the Olympics, you don't behave like you do at the Olympics. That's a very, very good approach, which we're going to look at as well. Any other approaches? Tamara, you have your hand up. Yes.
Yes. Perhaps it's a more spiritual explanation in the sense that by taking on more responsibility in the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, we're actually focusing more on the process that we need to go through to consider our lives and how we want to prepare ourselves spiritually for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and what we want to achieve in that time. So it's actually not so much what you're doing, but the focus, that you get a focus and a single-mindedness in your approach.
Very nice, Tamara. And this is not one of the approaches I'll be bringing today. So you must write this on your commentary on Rosh Hashanah when you publish it. And Tamara has said that these extra things are not necessarily ends in and of themselves, but they are means towards an end. A bit like an external uniform which you wear, not for the sake of the uniform, but to impact your behavior, to reflect that time. We take on some external things, not for their inherent value, but because they set the tone and they make us contemplate and they make us just pause and think at this time of year. And perhaps that is the role of those things. Any final suggestions? I finished my coffee, so I can go ahead now. Don't need to drink anything else. But any final suggestions before we move on? All right, so let's look at approach number 1. These are not the only answers, okay? These are not the answers. These are answers. And I very much recommend that around your Rosh Hashanah tables this year, you raise this question with yourselves or your families or whoever happens to be there. It's a good question to consider because it really makes us think about this entire time of year and what we're trying to achieve. One approach we can take from the Midrash in Vayikra Rabbah in source number 8. Because the Midrash points out a difference between the Rosh Hashanah Korban to all other Korbanot in Parshat Pinchas. B'chol Musafin Ketiv. For all of the Korban Musaf in Pinchas, it says, V'hikravtem, and you shall offer them. That is the wording. V'chan ketiv, but when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, it says, va'asitem isha. You should do this isha. So it doesn't say vehikravtem, it says va'asitem haketzad, the Midrash asks. Why is the wording different for the offering of Rosh Hashanah? It says as follows. Amar lahen HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. Hashem is telling us, Banai, my children, Ma'aleh ani aleichem, ki ilu hayom na'asitem lefanai. The wording hints to us that Hashem is telling us that it is as if you have just been made before me. Ke'ilu hayom barati etchem, as if I created you today, Bria Chadasha, as a completely new creation. The wording for Rosh Hashanah is va'asitem, because on Rosh Hashanah, each and every single one of us is made anew. Every single one of us is given a new beginning. And so our behavior in Rosh Hashanah is not just a continuation of that which came before, but we're starting off with a clean slate, especially on Yom Kippur, where we're given a completely clean slate. This is a time where we are new people. And the way that we treat new things is different from the way that we treat old things. If you've just got a new car, and on your brand new car, one of the grandchildren makes some crumbs inside, that will be very frustrating. Or if in your brand new car, you get a tiny scratch on the wing mirror, then that would be really, really disappointing. And that scratch would really stand out and frustrate you and upset you. And that's what you're going to look at when you look at the car. You'll look at the scratch, not at the car. But a few months later, and a few months later, a few years later, where Baruch Hashem, the grandchildren have spent a lot of time in your car and it's been through a lot and it's picked up the odd scratch here and there, obviously always other people's fault, then a crumb here or there or a scratch here or there is not going to disturb you so much. Our approach to Rosh Hashanah is the approach of something which is new, something which is clean, and therefore we are extra particular with our behavior at the beginning because we are made new on Rosh Hashanah. And there's a lovely model in Rabbi Natan in source number 9, which I think describes this. This can be applied in so many areas, but I've brought it just in this context, even though I think it could be used in many contexts. And he says as follows. He says this is reflected in the sounds of the shofar, the process of the shofar, where they themselves hint at the tshuva process. And I'll explain that in a moment. The middle sound in every set of shofar sounds, it'll start off with a tkiyah and it'll end off with a tkiyah. In the middle, you'll have a tru'ah, which is either what we call a shvarim, which is more of a groaning sound, or what we call a tru'ah, which is more of a staccato, high-pitched sound. The middle section of the shofar blasts represents our crying out to Hashem to return to Him. So that turmoil, that broken state, the broken spirit, the crying to Hashem is the middle section of the shofar blasts. V'al kain, therefore, tru'ah pshuta lefanei pshuta lachareha, before and after every tru'ah, we have a simple unbroken note. Zeh meramez gam ken ala tshuva. This is the tshuva process. Shemitchila haya pashut u'metukan. Everything starts off clear, unbroken. Everything starts off like a tkiyah. Hainu kodam hakilkul, that's before we break things up and ruin things. V'achar shenit kalkel, once things have been ruined, al yedei chozer v'nifshat, things return once more to a tkiyah. Teshuvah is a return to the beginning of the process. It is a return to a tkiyah. That is the tkiyah afterwards. The tshuva process is one where things start off clear and unbroken. It all gets messed up, but it returns to that state of being unbroken. And so the way we behave during a tkiyah, the way we behave when things are clear, when things are new, where things are bright again, is different than the way we behave at other times. That is one approach, and there's much to be said there, but I'd like to look at some other approaches as well. The second approach, let's call it the domino effect, and I think we could put Riva's suggestion in this approach. And we're going to learn a mashal, a story of the Baal Shem Tov. Now, I am sure that I am not the most qualified person in this Zoom session today to talk about Mashalim of the Baal Shem Tov. And therefore, those of you who know these stories better than me and the meaning of these stories better than me, please do add in that which there is to add in. And for those of us who were not necessarily brought up on Hasidic stories as a staple of our Jewish identity, it is important to know that Hasidic stories are not just stories. It's not just you have a story which represents something, and then you've got a message, and then may Mashiach come, v'chein yeh ratzon v'nomar amen. It's far deeper than that. You know, I've got a cousin called Rabbi Simcha Mervis, who's a Breslover Chassid in Tzfat. He used to be modern Orthodox. He went to the same yeshiva as me, and then he went off the derech, and now he's a Breslover in Tzfat, and he's the chavruta of Rav Koenig, the head of the Breslov Hasidim in Tzfat. Breslov in Tzfat isn't dancing around Nanach stuff. It's a serious Breslov. And for some reason, his name is Rabbi Simcha Mervis, the happy Mervis. My name is Daniel Mervis, the Mervis of Din and Judgment. It just happened that way. So I'm actually even thinking of doing a joint Zoom session with him soon, maybe before Sukkot, to talk about Simcha and Sukkot. So what does Rav Simcha do on a Shabbos morning? First of all, he davens in the Breslov Shul in Tzfat, which is the most beautiful shul. And Pesukei de Zimra there takes 45 minutes. It's amazing. If ever you wanted to take your time in the stillness of the morning over Pesukei de Zimra, that's the place to go, at the Breslov Shul in Tzfat at the bottom of the hill. Then, after davening, which is a beautiful tefillah, they sit around, they have their kugel, and then you go to Rav Koenig, and Rav Koenig tells you a story. That is what the adults do. They go to their Rebbe, who tells them a story. And I asked him, Simcha, come on, it's the same stories the whole time. You know the stories of Rav Nachman. Why are you going to hear the stories of Rav Nachman again? And he says, no, every single time Rav Koenig tells the story, it means something else. Every single time I hear the story, it has a different layer of meaning or nuance, even though they are the same words. The stories are read from a booklet. They're read from an official text and series of stories of Rav Nachman. Nevertheless, I'm just letting you know, I'm saying this to bring some life to the fact that a Hasidic story is not just a story. A Hasidic story contains within it tremendous depth of knowledge and messages which are supposed to be conveyed, which is why you have university professors in Israel writing studies and books about stories, like the story we're going to read today. What was it meant? What did this mean? What did that mean? There's a serious study of these stories. It is not just a story. And with that beautiful introduction, if I say so myself, let's learn the story which is said in the name of the Baal Shem Tov. We always need to quote things in the name of the Baal Shem Tov. We don't say that it was said by the Baal Shem Tov, because we have very little which was actually recorded as being said by the Baal Shem Tov himself. Very, very little. So we say things in the name of the Baal Shem Tov because it has come out from his students after him. And this is the story of the Baal Shem Tov, which you may know already. למלך שעשה מחיצות רבות באחיזת עיניים זו לפנים מזו. You had a king who was living in his palace. And around his palace, he made a number of barriers, many barriers, but they were b'achizat einayim, illusionary barriers. Let's call them virtual reality, or they were just illusions. V'gam sivuv min kotel v'kotel naharot, and between each of the walls there were rivers. V'gam chayalot rabim mevuhalim, and also terrible groups of scary groups of soldiers. V'gam dubim v'arayot v'shar chayot mevuhalim, and lions and tigers and scary animals and bears. B'chdei shiru migeshet elav, so that people would be scared to approach him. Now, the king himself is amazing. The king is, this means awesome. And he rules over everything. And the shining countenance of the king just illuminates all the world. And his glory fills the world. So the king himself is nothing to be scared of. The king is incredible. The challenge is that we have these walls and these other things, these other illusions, which prevent us from seeing the king. Uchruzim yotzim, and announcements come out, and they say, Kol mi sheyavo el hamelech yiten lo hamelech osher v'chavod. Whoever reaches the king will give him wealth and glory. V'yesar etzlo v'omed b'hechalo, and you'll be a minister with him, and you'll stand with him in his sanctuary. And then people are, all right, let's take it on. Umihu she'eino rotzeh bazeh. If there's somebody who didn't really want to come close to the king, what would he do? Rak the moment that individual reaches the first obstacle, the first wall, you say, wow, how long is this wall? How tall is this wall? And all the other things which terrify our hearts, the person says, whoa, I can't do this. And they just go away. That is for most people. But then there's another type of person. Aval ben hamelech, but the son of the king. Asher me'av hamu el aviv, whose innards yearn for his father. That's taken from Rosh Hashanah, Haftarah, and davening. Ukesheba lechomot, when that person reaches these walls, ulenaharot and the rivers, v'chayalot and soldiers, v'dubim and bears, v'chol ha'mavilim u'masdirim et pnei hamelech, and all these terrifying things. Tama atzmo lim'od. The prince, the king's son, thinks to himself, Ma ze melech rachman kamotcha krachem aval banim tastir atzmo bastarot ke'elu. Hashem, a merciful king like you, who has mercy like a parent has mercy for their child. What are you doing hiding yourself with all these different things? And so I come along and I cry out to Hashem, Kli, Kli, lama zaftani, my God, why did you forsake me? And with the power of his heart, which is burning and broken, just desiring to come to his father, he just gives of himself and forces himself to skip over the walls and the rivers. And he gives of all his wealth to bribe the soldiers who are there. What happens next? When his father sees his yearnings, and his self-sacrifice, and his cry goes up in the ears of his father, the king, then Heisir ha'achizot. Einayim halalu, not Heisiri, it is Heisir. The king removes these illusions. Vayar haben ki ein shum choma. And then the son realizes, wait a second, there's no wall here. There's no screen to separate us. Just beautiful pasture, orchards, and everything is wonderful. And the king's servants are standing there in their wonderful clothes. And all the musicians are there. The king is sitting on his glorious throne. And the land is just shining, basking in the light of the glory of the king. That is the story of the Baal Shem Tov, which we could spend a lot of time analyzing. For our purposes today, I think it fits in with Riva's answer where she said, Mitoch shelo lishma balishma, that to a certain extent, you need to jump into something. And once you've done that, other things are going to fall into place. We can call it the domino effect. At this time of year, we take on certain extra things and we are extra particular and we are extra careful. But the aim of doing that is to prove to ourselves that actually this isn't so difficult. And we realize to ourselves that actually we could live on a higher level. And then we think to ourselves, you know what? I thought I could never be that kind of Jew. I thought that wasn't for me. I clipped my own wings. I cut myself short. I didn't view my own potential or give myself a chance. But at this time of year, we live on a higher level. And then when we do that, we realize, you know what? It's actually not that difficult. Those things that I was terrified of, they're not that scary. That king who I thought was so far away and so beyond is actually really, really accessible and very, very close. And so at this time of year, we tell people to take the first step. At this time of year, we all make an extra effort, with the hope being that that energy and that experience will have that domino effect and will promote us on to further places. What I find particularly fascinating in this story is the fact that the king put up those barriers in the first place. In my reading of the story, it's not that the human being has illusions. It's not that we ourselves have created these barriers. It appears in the story that the king himself, with a very big H, erected the barriers, which means we need to ask, why did the king put up these barriers? Why did the king want us to go through this experience? Why by design is the journey to the king one which has scary illusions along the way? Something to think about. I think it is of value, but just putting it out there. So far, we've seen two approaches to our question about our elevated standards at this time of year. Approach number one that we saw was the fact that at this time of year, we are all new, and therefore it's like a new car, and the small things are actually big things. Approach number two is that there's a certain domino effect to our elevated experiences at this time of year. Approach number three is another mashal, this time from the Balatanya, which is sourced back to the Likutei Torah in source number 11. Hine yuvan al pi mashal, if things can be understood like a parable, lemelech shekodem bo'ol la'ir yotzin, where you have a king who is approaching and on his way to the city. Before he arrives to the city, everybody goes out likrato to meet him, umekablim panav b'sadeh, and you welcome him in the field. There's an amazing opportunity. The king's not in his palace behind all those different things. Anybody who wants can race out to the field and have a kabbalat panim, a reception, an audience with the king. The king is accessible and the king is near at this time of year, which has been turned to the words Hamelech Basadeh, the king is in the field. Hashem accepts everybody with a smiling countenance. And everybody is very happy and nice face. And then everybody follows him and accompanies him into the city. Aseret Yemei Tshuva, already Elul as well, but this time of year is a time of year where we have an increased level of encounter with Hashem. Hashem is much closer than other times of year. So if we go back to Minna Grossman's answer before, where she gave the mashal of an Olympic runner, the way you behave at the Olympics isn't the same as when it's not the Olympics, and that's not hypocrisy. And so this time of year are let's call them our Olympics. This time of year is when we are in the presence of the king, and when you are experiencing an intensity in your encounter with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's only natural that you behave in a different way. Do people wear the same clothes on the beach that they wear in shul? No. Unless they're really, really frum, or really, really not frum, the answer is no. People don't wear the same clothes on the beach that they do in shul. Is that hypocrisy? No. The beach is the beach, and the shul is the shul. This is also very helpful in educational settings. When people sometimes might ask in a youth movement, why are you imposing certain standards here? Or in a school setting, why are you imposing certain uniform standards here, which we don't keep in our homes? The answer is that you can ask those people, how do you dress in shul? And they'll tell you how they dress for shul. And you say, well, here in our school, here in our youth movement, we want that kind of atmosphere. This is a place where that is the atmosphere which you're trying to set. And it's not hypocrisy to dress differently in shul than you perhaps do outside shul. So to behave differently during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, at a time when the king is in the field, is not necessarily an expression of hypocrisy. It is just the right thing to do. In fact, If you were to behave in the Olympics the way you do 3 months after the Olympics, you're an idiot. You're a fool. Who wouldn't up their game at this time of year? Who wouldn't raise their standards at this time of year? Who wouldn't be extra careful when the policeman's in your face? Of course, this is the way you're supposed to behave at this time of year. It's not necessarily hypocrisy, but an expression of the appropriate way to behave at this time of year. With our remaining minutes this morning, what I would like to do is to look at a different approach, which is a much broader approach, which is the approach of Rav Kook. Rav Kook's writings are not very accessible because Rav Kook's writings, first of all, he was writing Hebrew at a time when Hebrew wasn't really a vernacular. So to a certain extent, he was making up words and sentence structures as he went along. Also, Rav Kook's words are very much laced with Kabbalistic concepts. There's a debate as to how Kabbalistic Rav Kook really was. I'm on the side of the debate which says he was incredibly Kabbalistic and intentionally so. It wasn't just borrowing Kabbalistic terminology, but he was very much stooped in Kabbalah. Either way, if you decide with your chavruta that you're going to read something from Rav Kook and you open it up and you have no idea what's going on, that's absolutely fine. And if you then think, all right, we'll learn it in English, and you read it in English and you have no idea what's going on, that's also absolutely fine. Rav Kook's writings are difficult and you have to have a certain context in order to understand his words. And what I'd like to do is to start off with one comment in Rav Kook, and with whatever time we have left, explore his world of Teshuvah. Source number 12 is from Orot HaTeshuvah of Rav Kook. There's a lot I could say, because we also need to keep in mind that Rav Kook didn't write Orot HaTeshuvah, in that everything which appears in Orot HaTeshuvah was written by Rav Kook, but he didn't compile the book. So the order in which Keta'im, paragraphs, appear and the division into chapters wasn't chosen by Rav Kook himself. In fact, I heard somebody once say that if you want to read Orot HaTeshuvah, you can read 3 chapters, miss out 3 chapters, read 3 chapters, miss out 3 chapters, read 3 chapters, miss out 3 chapters throughout the whole book, and you'll get the entire book and you haven't missed anything at all. So you don't necessarily have to read Rav Kook from cover to cover, because that's not the way he himself wrote it. Anyway, source number 12 from Orot HaTeshuvah. He says, Hachush hamusari, the ethical sense. Tovea meha'adam et hatzedek v'hatov, demands from the individual that which is righteous and good. Et hashleimut, perfection. In other words, natural human morality makes us want to strive for perfection. We are all on a journey to perfection, to try and get everything right. However, he comments, V'hashleimut hamusarit, when it comes to ethical perfection, kama rechokahi me'adam lagshima b'foal. How far away is perfection from us when we talk about ethical perfection? How imperfect are, or not, I mean, you are all perfect, but people like me, how imperfect are we all? Perfection is so far, far away and beyond. In fact, you might say it's impossible. Ve'ech yish'af el mashe, oh, sorry, I'll add in a letter there. She'eineno bicholato klal. How can an individual strive towards that which you can never achieve? Rav Kook here is asking about the paradox, which is, we want to do everything right. We want to be perfect. We will never be perfect. And so Rav Kook is asking, why or how can a person aspire to that which they're never going to aspire? What's the point? Or how are we supposed to do it? Our life is a pursuit of something which we are never, ever going to reach. In fact, you can add and you could say that the closer we get to perfection, the further away it is. Like the closer you get to Hashem, the bigger he becomes and the further away he becomes. If you think you understand Hashem, then your understanding of Hashem is very simple. If you think that you can't understand Hashem, your understanding of Hashem is truer and more complex. And the extent to which you know that you don't know Hashem increases your knowledge of Hashem. Our closeness, our aspirations for perfection are chasing something which we're never going to get. So what should you do? Rav Kook goes on to say, Lazot, for this, Hatshuva hitiv'it la'adam. In order to make this whole paradox work, we have a concept. And that concept is called teshuvah, which is natural. It's an inbuilt part of the system. Vehi mashlimato, teshuvah is what makes us shalem. It is teshuvah which perfects us, which completes us. And he goes on to say, Im ha'asham alul tamid lichshol. If the guilty party continues tripping up, liot pogem b'tzedek uva musar, and is imperfect, whether it's with righteousness or with ethics. He says, if a person keeps tripping up, ein ze pogem et shleimuto, that does not impact their perfection. Failures and falls do not negate perfection. Why? Because the fundamental principle of an individual's perfection is the skipping and the fixed desire towards perfection. This desire is the fundamental principle of teshuvah. What Rav Kook is saying is as follows, and I know it's quite heavy for a Monday morning. What Rav Kook is saying is that the definition of shleimut is the pursuit of shleimut. That's what he's saying here. The definition of perfection is trying to be perfect. If you are trying to be perfect, you have reached human shleimut. Human shleimut is embarking on that journey of self-improvement. And regardless of whether you've reached that end goal or not, we're never going to reach that end goal. None of us will ever be perfect. That's not the point. The point is, are we trying our best? And if you're trying your best and you're engaged in the pursuit of perfection, that itself is human shleimut. And therefore, Rav Kook says, you could have a perfect individual who keeps tripping up. You could have a perfect individual who keeps failing. You could have a perfect individual who keeps getting things ethically wrong and wrong in other areas of righteousness, because perfection is not where you reach. Perfection is that constant struggle and journey towards perfection. And as long as you are engaged in that pursuit, that is human perfection. I'm bringing this approach in the context of our question today because the fact that we take on certain things in the austerity of Teshuvah, which may not last, does not mean that there's something inherently wrong with the process. It is a natural part of the process that we try and we fail. But then what we have to do is to continue trying again and again. But the fact that something isn't a permanent change and isn't perfect doesn't mean that we are failing entirely at this time of year. It is a time to increase our efforts and to run that little bit harder towards perfection. But the definition of human perfection is trying our best to be perfect, which means for each of us, shleimut will mean different things. If you have two parachutists who land on a mountain, one parachutist lands at the top of the mountain, and the other parachutist lands at the bottom of the mountain. And the parachutist who lands at the bottom of the mountain manages to climb halfway up the mountain. Who deserves greater credit? The parachutist at the top or the one halfway up? Obviously the parachutist who's climbed half a mountain. You don't look at the end result itself. You look at what has this person achieved so far? And more importantly at this time of year, where is this person going? So if somebody's born, Baruch Hashem, into a family where Torah and Mitzvot and Hashem and Musar and all these things are natural to them, and they're born at the top of that spiritual mountain, shkoyach, well done. But if somebody's born somewhere else, and they themselves engage on that journey in order to climb that mountain, they may not have the same level at the moment of observance and Yirat Hashem and knowledge as somebody who is born at the top of the mountain. But in terms of their shleimut, they have a much stronger sense of shleimut. They're living their lives as perfect human beings. And the truth is that even if you were born at the top of the mountain, you're not going to stay there. It's a bit like a downward escalator, where if you do nothing, you're going to be falling. To stay in the same place, you have to make an effort. Just to maintain your spiritual level is an effort in and of itself. And to increase your spiritual level, you have to try that much harder. But shleimut is, even though you are falling and it's natural to fall, being part of that pursuit of shleimut. So when it comes to the concept of teshuvah in Rav Kook, the concept of teshuvah in Rav Kook is engaging on the journey towards perfection, and is part of the broader Kabbalistic concept. If we said before about the tkiyah shvarim trua tkiyah, that things start off well and then they break apart, and then you return to things being united and good and unbroken once more, that is the bigger model of teshuvah in Rav Kook. So let's look at a couple of other ideas of Rav Kook about teshuvah, which can be empowering and helpful at this time of year. In this context, Rav Kook says something I really like in source number 13. This is from Perek Yud Daled of Orot HaTeshuvah. If you are going to study Orot HaTeshuvah by Rav Kook, Perek Yud Daled is the practical Perek. It is the one with practical advice. It is less heavy philosophy and concepts and more, this is what you've got to do. And this is how he starts off Perek Yud Daled of Orot HaTeshuvah. He says, כשם שצריכים להעלות את המידות והמחשבות הרעות לשורשן. Just as we need to elevate the bad midot, those bad character traits and thoughts, to their root. Note how Rav Kook's process is one where you elevate something to its root, because you're going back to where you started. It's like a cycle. So you're elevating something back to where it came from. So just as you need to focus on the bad things in your life, what's good is I'm a simple person, so I can put this in simple words. כדי לתקנן ולמתקן, in order to fix them and sweeten them, enhance them, כן צריכים להעלות את המידות והמחשבות הקטנות, אף על פי שהן טובות, אבל אינן במעלה גדולה ומאירה, למכור שורשן ולהריין באור של גדולה. So too, we need to elevate those character traits and thoughts which are small, albeit they're good, but they're not as bright as they could be. Those also have to be elevated to shine in their greatness. In other words, what Rav Kook is saying is that when it comes to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we want to elevate ourselves, and we want to go on that journey of the pursuit of Shleimut, we shouldn't just arrive with a list of the things that we do wrong. It's not, I want to stop this, I want to be better at that, I want to be more particular about the other. It's not just a bad list. Rav Kook says there's a lot of other work we need to do here, which is to look at all those things in our life that we're good at, the things we do well, our positive potential that we do well, but we could do much better. And we also have to arrive at Hashem with a list of things that we do well, which is a very different approach, which is I'm good at these things, but you know what? I could do them even better. And then he says, just as the entire world benefits when an individual works on the things which they do wrong, the world benefits much more when we invest in the things that we do well. Teshuvah is a global process in Rav Kook. The individual journey is connected to a global journey of redemption. But he says that the world benefits much more from when we focus on our positive things than when we focus on our negative things. We need to fix that which is wrong. It's true. But if we have light bulbs which aren't very bright at the moment, and we can make those light bulbs shine much, much brighter, that'll bring far more light to the world than trying to fix the broken windows and the other things which are making things dark at the moment. He's saying we have to fix that which is broken, but we also need to invest in improving the things that we do well. And then he says, this quality of uplifting and elevating small things to greatness, meaning the things we do well to things that we do brilliantly, that is a never-ending project. And that is complete tshuva. שצדיקים גמורים באים על ידה להיות עולים במעלות בעלי תשובה, that tzadikim gmurim can even overtake ba'alei tshuva. You see, we have a concept that where a Baal Tshuva stands, no one else can stand. The Baal Tshuva is the individual who's climbed halfway up the mountain, who started off somewhere through no fault of their own, or maybe even better, they started off at the top and they jumped all the way down and now they're climbing up again. Not that you should jump down on purpose. A Baal Tshuva can reach a level that a Tzaddik Gamor cannot reach. But Rav Kook says that there's a way that a Tzaddik Gamor can go even higher than a Baal Tshuva. And that is when a Tzaddik Gamor does what they do well, even better. When it comes to correcting the things that you've done wrong, you're never going to beat a Baal Tshuva. The Baal Tshuva is the best, and you can't even stand where they stand. But when it comes to doing the things that we do well, even better, then that is where a Tzaddik Gamor can have a huge, huge impact. And so, Aseret Yemei Tshuva is not necessarily a time when we only focus on that which we do wrong. It's a time where we make an extra effort in the things that we do well, and we try and do them even better. And that'll have a major impact on ourselves and on the world as well. What is the greatest challenge to tshuva? Rav Kook says as follows. In Keta Daled, we don't have to do his teachings in order, because like I said, he didn't write them in order. And here we go. Ikar hanefilot ba'ot. What's the main reason why we trip and why we stumble? The major obstacle to tshuva is is that we don't believe in how easy tshuva is. The major obstacle to tshuva is the lack of self-belief. It's the fear of tshuva. It's not knowing how easy tshuva is. It's all of those illusions where you think that tshuva, you know, what, you want me to keep kosher properly? What, you want me to keep Shabbat on that level? What, you want me to be that careful about what I say? I could never do that. It's the lack of belief in how easy this process actually is, which is holding us back. And that is the major obstacle to teshuvah. It is that illusion. It is that lack of belief into how easy teshuvah really, really is and how accessible teshuvah can be for us. I'll conclude with just one comment of Rav Kook, which reflects his entire philosophy of teshuvah. And he says as follows. When a person tries to be a tzaddik gamor, a complete tzaddik, it is difficult to be a Baal Tshuva. Meaning, if you are over-ambitious with your aims of who you want to be at this time of year, you're going to struggle to be a Baal Tshuva. Which means that if you're halfway up the mountain and you try to behave like somebody who's at the top of the mountain without going through those stages in the middle, you're going to miss out on both counts. So what should you do? Al-Kain, therefore. Your aim shouldn't be that I want to be perfect in every way. A person's aim should not be that I want to do everything absolutely right the whole time. Obviously, that's what you should ultimately aspire towards. But what your aim should be is actually to be a Baal Tshuva. It is about being engaged in that journey of getting there. Shakua barayon hatshuva, steeped in the concept of tshuva, v'sho'ef lidgat tshuva ha'ma'asit, and aspiring to its practical fruition. V'az tuchal tshuvato la'arim oto lamala, and then your tshuva could lift you up. So you shouldn't at the moment try to behave immediately in that way, but you should constantly be engaged in being on that journey to get there. And then you're able to reach the level of tzaddikim gemurim and even higher than them. These are very deep and very big and very philosophical concepts in Rav Kook, but to make it very, very practical. If you are by yourself at home this year and you are davening your Amidah of Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, and you're feeling that you're not getting there, you don't feel that you're singing with the angels, and you're not feeling the spiritual level, and you're trying really, 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 really hard, but you're just not connecting, maybe you're trying too hard. And you don't necessarily have to try and be the biggest tzaddik in the world when you daven. What you need to be is yourself. Take it one word at a time. Take it one sentence at a time. Understand what you're saying. And if you daven to Hashem on your level, and you do the best that you can on your level, that is shleimut. That is perfection. That is being in the pursuit of teshuvah. Trying too hard and being over-ambitious and trying to be the world's greatest chazan when maybe that's not your skill this year isn't what it's about. It's about doing tshuva on our own levels. So this morning we've looked at a number of approaches to the question, are we hypocrites at this time of year? Bezrat Hashem, the answer is no. We are absolutely not hypocrites at this time of year. The way we behave at this time of year reflects the appropriate way to behave at this time of year. Hopefully it'll give us that extra charge of energy and that impetus to have that domino effect and to bring the improvement with us right through the year as well. I know that I've said many things today, each of which has great potential for further discussion and further analysis. And I welcome you to continue this discussion around your tables this Rosh Hashanah with your families or with yourself, or these are things to think about. Are we hypocrites at this time of year? And what can we do at this time of year to ensure that we are not being hypocritical, but we are genuinely and sincerely engaging on that journey of trying to be the best people that we can be. I hope you have a beautiful day and a wonderful week ahead. And if I don't see you at any more shiurim or at Kohl's this week, k'tiva v'chatima tova.
Amen.
Shana Tova.
Thank you very much.
Shana Tova.
Amen. Hashem Yitbarach. Tiva v'chatima tova.
Thank you very much.
Shana Tova,
Shana
everyone.
Tova.
Shana Tova, everybody. Yes, thank you.
Shana Tova to everybody.
Shana Tova to everybody.
Shana Tova to everybody.
Shana
Thank you,
Tova.
Rabbi Danny.
Shkoyach, Rabbi.
Shana
Yes,
Tova.
Shana Tova to everybody.
Tiva v'chatima tova to everyone.
Yes.
Git gesinnt your.
Amen. Amen.